Look across the entire landscape of the National Football League right now, and you will be hard-pressed to find a more fascinating, volatile, and deeply contradictory situation than what is happening in Cincinnati. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are dissecting the massive identity crisis of the 2026 Cincinnati Bengals, a franchise that is currently being torn right down the middle between harsh, extremely public media critiques and massive, completely unprecedented roster moves. You see, the Bengals are essentially living in two parallel realities at this very moment. In one reality, they are widely viewed by analysts and fans alike as this incredibly archaic organization, a team that stubbornly relies on the sheer brilliance of their superstar quarterback to cover up some massively deep systemic organizational failures. But then, you look at the other reality. In that reality, this exact same front office suddenly morphed into the most aggressive buyers in the entire league, pulling off a shocking, franchise-altering blockbuster trade that literally no one in the NFL saw coming. So how in the world do these two realities exist at the exact same time? What pushes a historically conservative front office to suddenly push all their chips to the middle of the table? To understand the massive, defining gamble Cincinnati just took, we first have to look at the immense pressure they were under and exactly why they were backed into a corner in the first place.
We have to start here with this absolutely blistering critique from veteran NFL analyst Colin Cowherd. He recently went on a national stage and completely tore into the Bengals front office and ownership. And we really need to pause and examine the sheer weight of what he's saying here. Cowherd didn't just criticize a blown coverage in the fourth quarter or a single poor free agent signing. He took a sledgehammer to the very foundation of how the Cincinnati Bengals do business as a professional football team. When a prominent analyst goes on national television and flat out states that your franchise quarterback is effectively doing the job of your scouting department, that is a damning indictment of your entire operation. It paints a picture of a front office that is paralyzed, wildly reactive, and completely dependent on the generational talent they just happened to luck into drafting number 1 overall. It implies that without Joe Burrow literally pointing at the players he wants, the organization would be entirely lost.
Act 1. The Cowherd Critique and Systemic Flaws.
Let's break down exactly what Cowherd means by this, and why he firmly believes the Bengals are forcing their franchise quarterback to carry an incredibly unfair, almost impossible burden. You have to understand, this isn't just about one missed draft pick in the third round. This is about a fundamental philosophical flaw in how a modern NFL roster is constructed. It all starts with the glaring, almost unbelievable lack of front office infrastructure. Cowherd points out that Cincinnati previously listed only 4 scouts on their official website. 4. Contrast that with a team like the Philadelphia Eagles, who list a massive staff more than 3 times that size. In today's NFL, information is the ultimate currency. The most successful teams, your Eagles, your Ravens, your 49ers, they employ absolute armies of talent evaluators, advanced analytics experts, and deep-rooted regional scouts to uncover those hidden gems in the later rounds. They cross-check every single prospect meticulously. The Bengals, historically, have run a bare-bones, mom-and-pop operation in a league entirely dominated by massive corporate infrastructures. Now, to be completely fair, they have recently tried to modernize this personnel operation. Ahead of the 2025 season, they finally expanded, bringing in experienced scouts like Josh Hinch and Tyler Ramsey, and they gave Andrew Johnson a new title as a scouting executive. But in the eyes of critics like Cowherd, these additions are just a drop in the bucket, a band-aid on a bullet wound. The lingering perception, and arguably the reality on the field, is that Cincinnati is still drastically behind the curve when it comes to institutional talent evaluation.
To really drive this point home, Cowherd rewinds the clock back to the 2021 NFL Draft. This is the cornerstone of his argument. He points out that Joe Burrow essentially acted as the team's chief scout that year, actively pushing the franchise to draft his former LSU teammate Jamar Chase, completely bypassing the team's incredibly pressing, desperate need for offensive linemen. Cowherd stated that Burrow practically begged the organization to take the receiver he had just won an undefeated national championship with back in 2019. Now, if you ask Burrow, his own account is slightly less dramatic. He said he was just kept in the loop and offered his thoughts rather than making explicit demands. But the core narrative holds immense weight. The Bengals bypassed the conventional wisdom of protecting their most valuable, heavily hit asset to draft a flashy receiver, a decision based heavily on a pre-existing collegiate connection. And of course, we all know the result was absolutely magnificent on the field. Chase instantly became one of the most dangerous, explosive weapons in football. He completely transformed the dynamic of the offense and helped propel the Bengals to a miraculous, unforgettable Super Bowl run. But here's the catch, and this is what Cowherd is getting at. That early success might have been a massive double-edged sword. It masked the cracks in the foundation. It allowed the front office to pat themselves on the back and believe their threadbare process was sound. But in reality, relying on your 20-something quarterback to identify and campaign for elite talent is simply not a sustainable roster-building strategy for long-term success.
If you want to know exactly what that lack of infrastructure looks like on the field, we'll look no further than this.
Cowherd highlights these brutal, undeniable rankings that force the Bengals to have to win games via high-scoring, stressful track meets every single week. Since Joe Burrow arrived in Cincinnati, tasked with being the undisputed savior of the franchise, the Bengals have had the absolute worst run game in the entire NFL. Think about that for a second. The worst. Their offensive line, the very unit whose sole job is to keep their franchise savior upright and healthy, ranks in abysmal 27th. And the defense? The second worst in the league. This right here is the catastrophic, inevitable consequence of those systemic flaws we just talked about. You simply cannot build a lasting dynasty when your quarterback has to play perfectly, score 30 points a game, and overcome a completely non-existent rushing attack and a sieve-like defense just to pull out a narrow victory on a Sunday afternoon. Burrow is basically being asked to carry a boulder up a mountain every single time he snaps the ball. Cowherd's ultimate critique is that ownership fundamentally refuses to spend the necessary money or build the necessary depth to take that massive weight off his shoulders. The breaking point was coming. The media was absolutely merciless. The fans were restless. The team desperately, urgently needed an identity shift.
Act 2. The blockbuster countermove.
And then, right in the middle of all these systemic criticisms, right when the noise was at its absolute loudest, the Bengals front office executed one of the most shocking, aggressive moves of the 2026 offseason. They didn't just try to plug a hole with a mid-tier free agent. They swung for the absolute fences in a way that completely and totally betrays their notoriously conservative reputation. They set their sights squarely on Dexter Lawrence, an elite, game-wrecking interior disruptor who had requested a trade out of New York following a regime change under John Harbaugh and a highly uncharacteristic, quiet 2025 season. Let's really look at the profile of the man they decided to go after. Drafted 17th overall out of Clemson back in 2019, Lawrence is a colossal human being. He spent his first 3 years in the league proving he was a rock-solid starter. But in his fourth year, 2022, he didn't just play well, he ascended to absolute, undisputed elite status. We are talking about 70 pressures from the interior, the highest pass rush grade from Pro Football Focus for any interior lineman at 92.2, and his first Pro Bowl nod. He followed that up in 2023 with another Pro Bowl and top 10 Defensive Player of the Year votes. He was a monster. However, as we all know, the NFL is the ultimate "what have you done for me lately" league. In 2025, despite playing a full year, his volume production inexplicably plummeted to a career-low half a sack. Following that wildly disappointing season, with the Giants entering a completely new era, Lawrence won it out. The league-wide perception of the 28-year-old had suddenly dwindled. He was viewed by many front offices as a distressed asset, a huge risk, but the Bengals? They saw a golden opportunity to acquire a true bona fide defensive centerpiece, someone who could instantly, violently fix that second-worst defense ranking we just talked about.
To solve their defensive woes, Cincinnati shocked the entire NFL landscape by giving up the number 10 overall pick in the 2026 draft just 5 days before the event was set to begin. I really need you to let that sink in for a moment. The number 10 overall pick. In a league where draft capital is treated like absolute gold, where a top 10 pick represents a full decade of cost-controlled, premium franchise-altering talent, the notoriously frugal Cincinnati Bengals pushed their most valuable chips right to the middle of the table, and they did it just 120 hours before the draft kicked off. This is a massive, franchise-defining risk. If Lawrence shows up and plays like the guy he was in 2025, this trade is a colossal, historic failure that will set the Cincinnati franchise back years. It will waste the prime of Joe Burrow's career. But if he is the dominant, unblockable player he was in 2022 and 2023, it is the exact aggressive move that could finally bring a Lombardi trophy to Cincinnati. Love it or hate it, this move completely shattered the long-standing narrative that the Bengals won't make aggressive win-now acquisitions.
Act 3. Inside the financials and the new reality.
The Bengals didn't just give up premium draft capital, though. They made a massive, undeniable financial commitment to prove to the league, to their fans, and to their quarterback that they are serious about building a complete roster. You don't trade the 10th overall pick for a one-year rental. You trade it for a cornerstone. By extending Lawrence immediately upon his arrival, they locked him into a 3-year, $70 million contract with a prorated cap hit that remains remarkably, surprisingly manageable for the 2026 season. So the absolutely crucial point here is how the front office structured this new financial reality. They took the remaining money from his previous extension over in New York and creatively added a 1-year, $28 million deal right on top of it. He has an $11 million base salary this season, plus he has already pocketed a cool $10 million roster bonus. Add in his per-game bonuses, and his total cash earnings for 2026 alone will hit a staggering $22 million. But here's where the Cincinnati front office actually deserves a ton of credit. Because they purposely prorated that massive roster bonus over the full 3 years of the deal, Lawrence's actual hit against the salary cap this season is just $15.3 million. They acquired a top-tier defensive tackle, they paid him top-tier, heavy cash, but they brilliantly manipulated the cap to ensure they still have the breathing room required to operate and build depth. For an organization routinely mocked by analysts like Colin Cowherd for being cheap and not spending money, this right here is a loud $70 million rebuttal.
And if you were sitting at home, worried about how the 28-year-old veteran would respond to the massive pressure of that blockbuster trade and that hefty new contract, you can go ahead and stop worrying. So far, there is absolutely zero buyer's remorse inside that building. Lawrence is completely locked in and currently looks like the single best player on the field during training camp. Let's look at the psychology of this move and how it builds his legacy in Cincinnati. He's escaping a New York team that managed only one single winning season during his entire tenure there. He is hungry, he is highly motivated, and for the first time in a long time, he is surrounded by a locker room that actually expects to win a Super Bowl. During recent joint practices, reports heavily indicate that Lawrence has made life absolutely miserable for the Chicago Bears. He's blowing up plays in the backfield, he's wrecking offensive game plans before the quarterback even finishes his dropback. He is practicing with the raw intensity of a man who knows exactly what is expected of him, and he is out there delivering on every single snap.
This brilliant, spot-on quote from Yardbarker sums it up perfectly. Reports from those joint practices show him acting as the exact, desperately needed culture changer the franchise has been searching for. When you have a defense that is historically ranked near the absolute bottom of the NFL in almost every metric since Joe Burrow was drafted, you don't just need a good player, you need a tone setter. You need a massive alpha right in the middle of the defensive line who demands double teams, collapses the pocket, and suddenly allows your edge rushers and your linebackers to roam free and make plays. Lawrence is that centerpiece. His mere physical presence fundamentally shifts the calculus for every opposing offensive coordinator on the schedule. If training camp is any true indicator of what's to come, the elite, game-wrecking version of Dexter Lawrence has officially arrived in Ohio.
Which leaves us with one massive, looming question as the 2026 season rapidly approaches. Will Dexter Lawrence's dominance in the trenches be enough to finally fix this defense, or is Colin Cowherd ultimately right about the deeper structural flaws within the Bengals organization? We are about to find out if you can cure a systemic organizational disease with a $70 million bandage. If the Bengals march through the playoffs and hoist the Lombardi Trophy this year, this aggressive pivot will go down as one of the greatest front office masterstrokes in modern NFL history. But if the running game continues to stall out and the offensive line continues to leak pressure and Joe Burrow is once again asked to do the impossible every single week, then all the draft picks and all the money in the world won't change the undeniable fact that this organization relies far too much on its quarterback. The stakes have literally never been higher for Cincinnati. That wraps up this explainer. What do you think? Will Dexter Lawrence be the final piece of the championship puzzle? Or are the Bengals still fundamentally broken at their core? Let me know down in the comments. Make sure you subscribe to NFL Nexus, hit that like button, and support the channel by becoming a member. We'll see you next time.